Hey, welcome to Forums. My name's Peter. I'm going to be emceeing today. Firstly, Forums is part of the CU, and CU's aim is to make Jesus known. Forums, as part of that, looks at the exploration between faith and the world, so through apologetics, or what that means for our work or our life and all of that. So it's really awesome you could all make it today. It's going to be a really awesome time, so I'm glad you could all make it. Today we're hearing from Mark Sneddon, who is a adjunct law professor at Monash, as well as runs his own law firm, that's the right word, and various other things to do with it. So he's widely experienced, and it's fantastic to have him today as we look at how Christian faith intersects with the election. How should we vote and how should we think about these things? So let's give a warm welcome to Mark.
Thank you very much. And for people who are just coming in, there's a handout down there, and I think you might have missed one, but if you go back and grab one. Thank you for having me today. Good to be here. Can I just get a sense of what areas you're all studying in? You don't have to name yourself, but...
Finance is what I'm studying.
Okay, finance, yeah.
I used to study physics.
You used to study physics?
I'm no longer a student.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome.
Chemical engineering.
Chemical engineering, yeah.
Philosophy and literature.
Thank you.
I did mean communications, but no longer student.
Okay, that's all right. You could be no longer a student. It's all right. It's quite good, actually. That's what's meant to happen. You're meant to, at some point in your life, be no longer a student. So.
Criminology and politics.
Criminology and politics, yeah.
Politics history.
Okay.
Urban planning and square.
Okay. You're a staff worker?
I am.
Yes.
Anatomy and physiology.
Right.
Mechanical engineering.
Okay.
Maths.
Maths, yes.
Anthropology.
Anthropology, oh wow, such a diversity of topics. There's a handout just down there if you want to grab one. Okay, so I did law and science here 30 odd years ago, and 2 weekends ago I attended the reunion of the Melbourne Uni Christian Union at the time, which was honouring the then staff worker Peter Walker and his wife and another staff worker, Peter Leslie. So this is like sort of deja vu, sliding moments, different times, things for me.
Leslie told me about that.
Yes, Rosie was there, that's right. And I was also saying to Peter that I used to have pure maths lectures down in the, whatever it's now called, that lecture theatre downstairs at the bottom of the stairs, and the engineering students used to throw paper planes at the poor old lecturer at that time. So I did a law and science degree and majored in IT in the end, in my science. And I still work in law and science I do cryptocurrencies, fintech, regulation of financial services, but I also do public law, constitutional law, administrative law, government regulation, those sorts of things. So I've done a few different things with my law degree over the time. What I'm now doing is part-time practicing law, part-time, as was said, a Monash adjunct position, and part-time running a small think tank called the Institute for Civil Society, and there's a blurb about that at the end as well. And on the bottom of the handout, I think I've given you the reference to the website there. The Institute for Civil Society is on about having civil society and civil discussion in society, recognising that there are many different groups in a pluralist society, and we will disagree about things, but we should be disagreeing in a civil manner and defending each other's rights to hold our position, our respective positions, and to treat each other with respect and not try to deplatform people or shut them down or all of those sorts of things. So anyway, some of those issues may come up as we go on. So I've been asked to talk about approaching voting as a Christian, and I've given you a handout with 2 pages. But can I just ask anybody, well, I think I asked this before, but I'll ask it again, has anybody here not voted in a federal election previously? Okay, a couple of you. All right, so very quick Civics 101, if I may, so that you just understand what you're up for when you go in. There are 2 houses in the federal parliament. The lower house is the House of Representatives, and that'll be a green ballot paper. And with the green ballot paper, you elect 1 member for your local electoral district. There's about 100, I can't remember the exact numbers, about 151 of them around Australia. And they're all roughly the same size. They have to be to ensure rough equality of 1 person, 1 vote, or 1 value. And the party which ends up being able to control 76 of those votes, that is the majority in the lower house, becomes the government. It might get 76 votes in its own right, or it might go into a coalition or have the support of other parties and have a minority government. But whichever party manages to have the confidence of 76 or a majority of members in the lower house forms the government, and the leader of that party becomes the Prime Minister. and the other senior people in that party become the ministers in the government. So that's the government is elected on the basis of the lower house election. Some of the people elected to the Senate will also be members of that party, and they may form part of the government and be ministers as well. But the decision as to who is the government is determined by voting in the House of Representatives, the green ballot paper, where you elect one person for your electorate. In the upper house, which is called the Senate, we elect them on a statewide basis. So in Victoria, the whole state will vote for all the people running for the Senate. We'll elect 6 senators. So there's the whole state votes, not just your little local area. And a lot more people run in the Senate, so your local ballot paper might have 6 to 8 people on it for the House of Representatives. But the Senate, I have this because my wife's doing a postal vote, so I asked her if she would photocopy for me the Senate ballot paper. So I don't think anybody could possibly think this was a real ballot paper. It's a cobbled together copy of her postal vote ballot paper for the Senate. There are 32 groups running in the Senate, and there you see the big line in the middle. So above the line are the names of the 32 parties or groups. Some of them are ungrouped at the end and they're independents. And below the line are the individual candidates for the relevant party in the particular column. Okay. Now the way you vote, or the importance of the Senate, is that it's the second house, and to make a law you have to have the agreement of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So whoever you've elected in the House, they have certain powers as the government, but in order to change the law they have to pass a law through both the House and the Senate. So who you elect in the Senate becomes important. It's also important because of the electoral system that we have. It's very unlikely that either major party would have a majority in the Senate, so it will turn on who's on the crossbench, as they call it, which is the people who sit in the middle between the two major parties, and they would be people like the Greens, maybe the Australian Conservatives, Pauline Hanson's One Nation, maybe United Australia Party, mixture of people. Darren Hinch is there at the moment. You can get a very interesting mix of people on the Senate crossbench. But that becomes really important because, as I'll tell you a story in a moment about how important the crossbench senators are. Who you vote for in the Senate is probably just as important as who you vote for in the House. And in both cases, the number of boxes you mark as numbers determines how effective your vote is in terms of ongoing. So we have what's called a preferential system of voting. So you'll mark your box number 1 for someone, then number 2, number 3, number 4, so on and so on. What that means is when the votes are counted, number 1, whoever gets your number 1, your vote goes in the pile for them, and all the other votes are put out there. Whoever has the smallest number of votes in the pile, their votes are taken out, they're eliminated, and their votes are then redistributed according to where the number 2 is on that ballot paper. So then they redistribute that, and then they take the smallest pile away again, redistribute that until someone gets up to whatever the number they need to get. So in the lower house you have to get to 50, a bit over 50%. In the Senate you have to get to a bit over 14 or 15% to get a quota to get in the Senate, because remember you're electing 6 people in the Senate, not 1. Okay? So that's how it works. So if you only number, I think in the lower house you have to number all the boxes. I don't think you have a choice about that. In the Senate you have to number at least 6 boxes above the line or 12 boxes below the line. If you vote above the line, you're just voting on a party basis, and then you agree with whatever their choice of candidates is in the column below that. If you vote below the line, then you're choosing individual candidates, all right? The reason I'm saying that is if you just vote 1 to 6 in the Senate, which you're perfectly entitled to do, assuming that they haven't filled all 6 senator positions by the time they've counted your 6 votes, your vote exhausts and doesn't determine anything else about who becomes the 5th or the 6th senator. All right? Now, normally in Victoria or any state, you'll have 2 Labor senators elected and 2 Liberal national senators elected, and then the last 2 positions are up for determination according to how the votes run. So often it'll be another major party senator, and then the 6th seat will go to, the Greens, United Australia Party, or Darren Hinch, or Pauline Hanson, or Australian Conservatives, or whoever else is running and gets that. And that's done on a very complicated, distribution of all of those preferences back and forth. So what I'm saying to you in short compass is if you want your vote to influence that outcome, you should vote for all the people that you like on the Senate and not just stop at 6. Okay? That's the point of that message. Okay. Any questions about that? Sorry, that's very quick Civics 101, but if you haven't done civics before, hopefully it's news to you. No? Okay. All right, well, let's move on to the topic for today, which is approaching voting as a Christian. I'm not here to tell you how to vote. I obviously have my views, and I'm happy to explain them to you at the end when we get to discussion time if you want to, but I'm not here to tell you how to vote, and I think Christians can approach it prayerfully, wisely, sensibly, and come to different conclusions as to how to vote. Okay, so I'm not saying open your mouth and I'll thrust something down it. Why is it that Christians, or indeed people in general, might come to different views on how to vote? Well, I've tried to list out 5 factors at the top of the handout. I think people have, first of all, people can have different understandings of what government's for and what it's meant to be doing. I mean, that's at a very high macro level. But, for example, a Christian might look at Romans 13 and say, well, the purpose of the civil authorities, according to Paul there, is to suppress evil and to promote good, to punish the wrongdoer, and that, uphold the criminal law and promote good acts. And that's a sort of a foundational one. But it could go, and then the question is, I think everybody would agree with that, and the question is, what more should government do? And government in today's time is much bigger and has many more influences on society than it did in Paul's day when he was writing Romans 13. Nevertheless, there are reasonable points of difference for Christians and others as to what is the appropriate extent of government involvement in society. And your view as to how you vote might be affected by whether you're a small government person, a medium-sized government person, or a big government person. And that's a live debate, and people can have different views on that. Secondly, I think people differ as to how they vote because they might assess, well, some people don't even look at the character of the party cultures or the party leaders or the local candidates. I think most people look at least at the character of the leaders, but some people think you should and you shouldn't do that. I think as a Christian you should definitely look at character, because at the end of the day we elect people to become our government and our ministers and our Prime Minister, and you can't predict every issue that's going to come up, and you can't predict every policy issue that's going to arise and that sort of thing. So at the end of the day you're really relying on the people that you elect, and what you'd like to know is, what is the character of that person? Do they have integrity? Are they competent? Are they honest? Are they, I would put in, are they humble, and will they listen to the people that they're meant to be governing as well? They would be all character traits that I would be looking at in terms of who I would elect. And I would apply that to the leaders and the people who lead the party, but I'd also apply that to my local candidates as well. And I might in some elections choose a candidate whose policies I was a bit iffy about if I thought that they were a really good, decent person with good values and integrity and humility. So I would weight candidate character in with all the other factors that go into making a decision. And on that context, I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to go to a candidate forum in your electorate. So I went to one last Saturday in Chisholm, which is my electorate, and I saw 5 of the candidates. So the Labor Party candidate didn't turn up, but the Liberal Party was there, the Animal Justice Party, the Greens, United Australia Party, and an independent. So I got at least 5 of the 8 who were running. And whatever they say, you can get a bit of a sense of who they are and what they're likely to be like if they were your elected representative. And I think character is important, and I think you should take a view on the character of party cultures. I've mentioned that there because party cultures are different. There's been different views about the culture of what's gone on in the Greens in Victoria in recent times, and I'm not going to make a statement about that one way or the other, but there have been certain allegations made about the nature of the culture in that party, and likewise I think there have been allegations about bullying in the Liberal Party, and it's fairly clear that the Labor Party doesn't allow conscience votes on a lot of things. So to the extent that any of those issues are important to you, that might be something that you factor into your choice of which party do I like. Do I like the culture in that party or not like the culture in that party? Is that a factor that weighs in how I make my decision? And then going beyond our understanding of government and our assessment of party culture, character of party leaders and local candidates, we get into sort of the policy area. And people can differ, and Christians can differ about their vote on a number of levels. So first of all, the range of issues that they think is important. Right? The range of issues they think is important. So some people will vote on climate change and Adani, and that's it. Some people might vote on abortion and euthanasia, and that's it. Different people have different levels of concern about different things. And if you wanted to read some interesting research on that, you can read Jonathan Haidt, Righteous Mind, where he talks about how we form our moral preconceptions and moral psychology. But the issues are many: welfare levels, tax policies, workplace security, workplace flexibility, refugees, climate change, energy prices, discrimination against minorities. All of those issues are out there. Which ones are important, and people will either have them in scope or out of scope as they look at how they're going to vote. So you can have differences of opinion just on that. But even if you found people who had the same issues in scope, that is, they were looking at much the same range of issues, they might weight them differently. Okay, so they might say, for example, someone might be concerned about coalition refugee policy, but they're more concerned about the ALP and Greens policies to restrict freedom of religious schools and bodies to teach in accordance with faith and to employ people who live in accordance with the faith, or vice versa. They might be more concerned about the second than the first. The first rather than the second. So the weighting of issues becomes a point of potential difference. And finally, even if you've agreed on the range of issues that are important and you've agreed on the weighting of them, you might end up differing about what is the best public policy to address in respect of a particular issue. So you might all be on the same page that we need to look after the poor, but then we have a question of, well, are the poor better served by higher taxes to fund more redistribution through the tax system to fund more welfare services, or are they better served by a moderate or a lower tax policy which allows for more job creation to give more people jobs and more capacity to earn their own way through society and live with dignity that way rather than through welfare subsidies and promoting philanthropy through tax incentives. Okay, so and we can come down and talk about climate change and those sort of options as well. But so at all of those levels, there's scope for people to reasonably differ, and there's scope for Christians to reasonably differ. All right. So I think one of the things we need to do when we approach these things is to be humble enough to say that other people might, in good faith, be trying their best to work out how to vote and thinking this through, and to give them the respect and to think well of them, and to give them the respect that they are trying to do their best to come to a good conclusion, just as we are, and to be open to discussing those sorts of issues with them. Because I'm going to say at the end, I think if you can get into a conversation with someone around those sorts of issues, which is not an emotionally loaded conversation, you might be able to explore people's worldviews, what they think is important, and that will come back to the nature of what they think is a good society, what makes a good person, what makes good public policy, and all of that will come back to your view of humans, and maybe your view of God, and maybe your view of creation, and all of those sorts of things. So you're beginning to open up some questions there about the nature of man, humans, the nature of humans, and what is good or bad for the organisation of society and for human beings. Okay, so I'll just keep going on because I want to give lots of time for questions and discussion at the end. So I think Christians, when they come to vote, should have a number of different... I put it here. Christians should decide to vote, should decide how to vote with particular perspectives in mind. First of all, I think we should be grateful, because the vast majority of people in the world do not get to choose the people who govern them. They don't. They either have dictators, or they have corrupt regimes, or they have presidents for life, or they have single-party states where you get a ballot paper and you can choose any member of the Communist Party. But that's it. You don't get to choose anybody else, okay? And in some places it just doesn't make a difference how you exercise your democratic choice. In this country, we are very blessed that it does make a difference. Okay? And so you can have a peaceful transfer of power. I'm not saying democracy is the most perfect system in the world, but I'm saying it's better than most of the other. In fact, it was Churchill's line. He said it's a pretty crap system until you consider all the alternatives. It's the best of the worst. It's the best of all the ones out there. So we should vote with gratitude for the blessing of being able to vote for those who govern us. I mean, Paul, when he wrote, and Jesus, when he lived, and the New Testament writers, they had no ability to influence who was going to be the governor or the king or the centurion or anything like that. They had no ability to influence the laws that were in place in the societies they lived in, and we do. So if God's given us a gift like that, which so many Christians in history and throughout the world don't have now, what do you think he expects us to do with it? To treat it lightly, or to treat it responsibly and carefully as a privilege, which not too many people in the world have. I think he's given it to us as a blessing and a privilege. And so we should treat it with due weight for the responsibility that is to choose carefully and to exercise that right carefully. So that's the second point. We should vote thoughtfully and carefully, which means we need to inform ourselves, first of all, about how the electoral system works, which is why I gave you a quick Civics 101 at the outset, and why it's important to number the people in your ballot paper, to go to some candidate forums to have a look at them and see what they're like. We should inform ourselves about the issues, about the policies of the different parties, about the party culture, about the character of the leaders and the candidates, and think those things through. Don't be lazy. You know, some people say, oh, I'm going to probably vote Greens or Coalition or whatever, I don't know, doesn't matter, I want to go to the footy. Or whatever it is that they want to go and do. No, I don't think that's a responsible way to approach an election, okay? You need to think it through. Now, obviously, there's limits to how much you can dig into the bottom of every single issue out there. I'm not saying you need to become a policy wonk on every single issue around that's open at the election, but you need to know enough to have come to a decision so that you could, let's say you wanted to defend to Helen, or I don't know if Helen's a person like this, but if you had to stand up in front of Helen and say, Helen, this is why I voted the way I did. I'm not saying Helen would ever do that to you, but that you could give a good account as to how you came to your decision on voting. That's, could you give a good account as to how you came to that decision? When you do that, I think you just also need to be very careful that a lot of political discussion and stuff that comes at us in this world comes with agendas and comes with bias, and that may not be a bad. It may not be an intentional manipulative bias, but it may be. So, for example, I'll give you a couple of things here. So I found this on the web, Australian Christian Values Checklist for the federal election. Here are the Christian Values Checklist. Protect life, save our children, stop taking the innocent life, oppose abortion, reject federal Labor's plans to force free abortions in public hospitals, say no to euthanasia, protect the vulnerable, disabled and the elderly, oppose teaching of gender fluidity in theory at schools, help parents and oppose sexualisation of children in schools, support the long-established tradition of opening Parliament with Christian prayer, support traditional family values and the teaching about Christian heritage in schools, continued support and funding of school chaplaincy programs, support equitable funding allocations for Christian and state schools, parental choice of Christian schooling, and so on. And I won't go through this 20, but you're getting a flavour there that particular issues are being selected. They're all legitimate issues. I'm not saying any of those issues are not legitimate, but there are other issues besides them. So this is the range of issue point that I made before. What range of issues are we considering? And then I thought, oh, ABC. Now the ABC, it's our ABC. So I'll go to their vote compass. If you vote compass is where you go on and you can put yourself in there and say, and then they promise if you answer all these questions, we'll tell you where you sit versus the major parties on policy issues. So I thought, oh, I'll do that, have a look at the questions. Listen to these questions. These are the ones off Vote Compass. How much should the federal government do to tackle climate change? That's number one. Boats carrying asylum seekers should be turned back. You meant to give a rating on each of these questions. So boats carrying asylum seekers should be turned back. The government should fund the expansion of preschool to 3-year-olds. All immigrants can retain their cultural values without being any less Australian. Transgender awareness should be taught in primary schools. Abortion services should be more accessible in Australia. How much should the government subsidise private health insurance? Trade unions have too much power in the workplace. How much tax should large corporations pay? Australia should end the monarchy and become a republic. Live animal exports should be banned. How high should the minimum wage be? How much funding should non-government schools receive from the Commonwealth? Now, there's a bit of a selection going on in the issues that have been picked up there. They're all progressive issues, aren't they? And again, none of those issues are unimportant or irrelevant, but I'm just saying that both this group, the ABC, and this group have a particular preordained set of issues that they're focusing on for the purpose of the election. I mean, there's nothing in the ABC, this is a lobby group, and the ABC I'd expect to do better. There's nothing in the ABC about foreign policy or defence or broader tax policy or anything like that, and job creation, nothing on that. And I thought, if you're the ABC, those sort of issues should be sitting in here as well. And nothing wrong with the issues that they've chosen, they're just limited. It's a limited range. So as you listen to voices, be they ABC or lobby groups or other, just remember people are coming with their own set. And then some people will come out with just out and out, false, fake news or manipulative comment as well. So you need to be careful in terms of what you take on board. We also need to vote, I think, biblically, which means we need to evaluate the issues, the policies, the party culture, the character of the leaders and the candidates in light of God's priorities as stated in the Bible. And I think we need to look at God's priorities as stated in the Bible first and consider popular opinion, ABC vote count, lobby groups and social media second or third or fourth. But we need to have a biblical understanding of God's priorities. And, within the Bible we'll find a range of issues as well. I'm not saying otherwise, but that's the principal source. That's the principal place we should be going to. Secondly, we should understand that God institutes human authority to suppress evil and promote good, and maybe to do other things, but we shouldn't think that governments are going to usher in the kingdom of God. I sometimes think when I meet people of any political persuasion who are really passionate about a particular party, that somehow I should try and find a way to say that governments are populated by sinful humans who can sometimes use their power wisely and sometimes use their power very unwisely and sometimes in accordance with and sometimes contrary to God's will. So there's no salvation in a political party or a political leader. So let's just be a bit realistic about what the effect of this vote or this decision is going to be. Every 4 years the Americans elect the next saviour. And maybe Abraham Lincoln, but there haven't been too many really good saviours. Obviously there are people who do better and worse. I'm not saying otherwise, I'm just saying keep it in perspective. Christians should decide how to vote prayerfully because it's complex, right? So ask God to help you work through which issues are important, which policies are important, what the best way to achieve the outcome that you think is good on the issues is, how to assess the party culture, the character of the leaders and the candidates is. Prayer, I think, is really important because it's messy and there's a lot of noise and, misleading stuff coming at us. And I think it's also important to try to do this, to vote or work out your voting intentions in community, with humility, with other Christians, including being open to opportunities to talk about the good news with Christians and non-Christians. And I don't say that to achieve groupthink. I don't say we sit around until we all come to consensus and say, well, all right, we're all going to go and vote for Conservatives or we're going to vote Greens or whatever it is. You do that to test out your own thinking and your own biases, because we all have biases. And as Proverbs says, in the multitude of counsellors there's safety. That's actually written in the mosaic in the vestibule of the Victorian Parliament. Where the people are without guidance, there's trouble, but in the multitude of counsellors there's safety. None of us has all the truth, so if we're sitting with other people with good intent and we can have a good, respectful discussion with them, we're all likely to come out better, informed and wiser at the end of it. And I think it may be that we can open up, as I said, the beginnings of a gospel conversation there by saying, I'm going to vote this way because I believe this is the way about human beings, that human beings flourish and da-da-da-da-da. So to take a controversial example, which might or might not lead in that direction, you might think about that policy that I mentioned before. Should we have federal funding extended to preschool for 3-year-olds? Should we have federal funding for preschool for 3-year-olds? And part of it, and it's only part of it, part of that debate turns on whether you think that for those who have a choice, and not everyone has a choice, it is better for 3-year-olds to be cared for by a member of the family, a parent or a grandparent, or whether it's better that they be in a federally funded place in a preschool or not. And whether it's better that they be educated by the family at that level or by the state at that level. So that, I understand it's a complex issue. I'm not trying to tell you one way or the other on that. I'm just saying that issue has within it the seeds of how are humans best formed, where are they best trained, where do we model what it means to be human. Okay? And who should have that responsibility. So you can think of many other issues. I mean, the whole issue of Adani and climate change and responsible stewardship of the planet and so on. All of that can lead back into Christian conversations. Okay, biblical guidance. I think, someone said, how would Jesus vote? What do you think? Is Jesus a conservative or is he ALP or would he go Greens, Animal Justice Party?
Before the monarchy, his own monarchy.
Before, oh yeah, no, this is, I'm saying, I'm thinking now before he becomes a non-democratic ruler. That's correct. Yes, because yes, that's a good point. Democracy is a temporary state. Okay, it won't always be. Yeah, I think if you look at biblical priorities and the life of Jesus, you see many emphases which are on care for the poor, the needy, the marginalised. And you might say, oh, well, that tends to be more of a left-of-centre policy, so I'd be thinking maybe Jesus is a Labor voter. On the other hand, I see a lot of stuff about personal responsibility and sexual ethics and living within the bounds of your commitments and your promises, particularly your promises about marriage and things like that. So maybe he's an Australian Conservative voter. And I think the truth is that Christians sort of straddle, or the Christian worldview straddles both, isn't it? It's care for the marginalised and the poor, but it's also personal responsibility and sexual and ethics and honesty and all of those sort of things. And no, you can't do anything you like with your body. So it's both sides of the spectrum, which means, in other words, that I don't think you can really categorise Jesus or a Christian view as being right or left. I think it's just Christian. And the world might look at it and say, well, hang on, part of that's left and part of that's right, you don't fit. And you might say, well, actually, you don't fit, because this is God's view of humankind, and you've gone two different ways which both have truth in it, but not all truth in it. So, if we're going to look to biblical guidance, we could, as I said, consider the purpose of government, and I won't go back through that again, but part of the issue will be, you might think, what if any, other limits on what government should be getting into in terms of size of government, redistribution of wealth, and the types of issues it should be regulating, or whether they should be left to individuals and civil society organisations. You'd want to consider God's moral laws like the Ten Commandments, and then how Jesus amped them up in the Sermon on the Mount. Some of those things should be implemented in human laws, like I think we should have human laws against murder and theft, but some of them can't be implemented, like looking at people lustfully. Well, you're never actually going to be able to prove that happened, and it's just not going to be viable to have the jails built for everyone to be put in them. So that's a moral law, not a criminal law. And then there's a group in the middle which will be arguable as to whether or not you want to legislate a particular view of Christian morality or not. Not on the basis that it's Christian, but on the basis that it's good for society, because God's law is good for all of humankind. So for Christians, I think governments, you could say at least this, that governments and human law, I should be really clear on that. I'm not suggesting for a moment that human government should be implementing any set of religious precepts, holus bolus. I'm not in favour of theocracy, I'm not in favour of a Christian state or a Muslim state or a Hindu state or anything like that. Right? We live in a pluralist democracy. I'm just saying, as a Christian, as you think about voting, one of the issues you might think about is this government policy conducing to the types of statements about God's moral law that were made in the Old Testament and by Jesus in the New Testament? Okay, that's what I'm saying. So for Christians, governments and human law ought not directly contradict or work against God's moral laws, although they may do so. And we live as Christians live as a minority in a pluralist democracy, and that democracy might elect governments which pass laws which are contrary to Christian worldview and Christian morality. Secondly, I think you should consider the interests of all people, and not just yourself. Most people, or many politicians, appeal to people on the basis of their self-interest. But we're told to honour one another above yourselves, and in humility consider others better than yourselves, and look not just to your own interests but to the interests of others. That should be the case when we come to vote as well. What's for the good of the broader society? What is good for overall for Australia? Which parties have the right policies for that? Consider the interests of the poor and the weak. I think it's beyond argument that God has a strong interest in defending the cause of the poor and the weak, the fatherless, the homeless, the refugees, and delivering them from the hand of the wicked. You'll find that in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, there are then some questions to flow on as to how much government is to do that and how much individuals and civil society organisations are to do that, and which government policies are best to achieve the looking after the interests of the poor and the weak. That doesn't automatically translate into let's have maximum tax and maximum redistribution through welfare, but it does say what are we doing as a society one way or another, either through direct government action or through government incentivisation of individual or civil society action, to look after the poor and the weak. That should be in the Christians' mix when they come to vote. Maintaining the freedom to spread the Christian message throughout Australia. I'm conscious that I'm speaking at the Christian Union, so I think the purpose of it is to make Christ known. Is that what you said, Peter? Yep, okay. So the eternal importance of human choice in relation to trusting or rejecting Jesus Christ is pretty fundamental. So assessing the parties and the policies which may promote or restrict the ability to spread the gospel should play a part in a Christian's voting decisions. But I just put the caveat on that in a pluralist democracy, freedom of religion is for all people, not just for Christians. So if we're having freedom of religion, it's for everybody. Pray and stay engaged. You need to pray, and democracy is not a once every 3 years event. You need to sort of be aware of public affairs and what's going on. And then finally, trust God with whatever the outcome is. When you elect a government, you can have some really bad outcomes. I'm not saying otherwise. I mean, you look around some countries in the world where they have governments, it's really, really difficult for lots of people. It's particularly difficult for people of faith in some places. And so they can seriously affect earthly lives and laws, but can't affect God's eternal purpose. So that's our ultimate confidence. But that doesn't mean, don't worry about it, it's all going to be fine in the end, because we're not at the end yet. We're here, and so we have a responsibility for here and now to exercise the trust we've been given as voters and participants in a democracy, with the right to influence our elected members and our laws, to exercise that trust well for the benefit of all people in accordance with what we understand to be God's will and purpose. Okay? Let me give you one example. In December last year, November and December last year, the Greens put up a bill to amend the Sex Discrimination Act, which is a federal act. It has a provision in there allowing for religious schools to teach students in accordance with their faith position, and to implement policies which are in accordance with the faith position of the school. That was attacked on the basis that it would allow religious schools to expel gay students because they were gay. And everyone said, what a horrible thing. Sorry, many people said, what a horrible thing. And Christian schools said, we've never expelled anyone because they're gay. Indeed, we're still waiting for the documented case of that, but that was what was put. So the bill was put up by the Greens and then Labor to take away all of the ability of Christian schools in terms of dealing with students to act from a faith position. And the question was not expulsion, as I went and saw a number of Christian principals, because I went and did some advocacy on this, and they said, the issue for us is not expulsion, because we wouldn't do that. The issue for us is if I'm running a Christian school and I have students come to me and say, we would like to form a club or society to advocate for a gay lifestyle, which is contrary to this school's understanding of Christian views. Or we'll have people come and they might be gender transitioning and they want to be able to attend, or to use the bathroom or the change facilities of the gender which they identify as, but which they're not biologically yet representing. We want to be able to form a policy which looks after the students' interests, but is consistent with our understanding of who we are as a school and the values we're trying to teach students. And that's where the discrimination bit comes in, because the word discrimination in the Act says any detrimental treatment, any detriment or any refusal of a benefit. So if I say to the girls who want to form that club, no, you can't have that club, that's a detriment or it's a refusal of a benefit. And if I say to the student who wants to attend, this is a boy transitioning to be a girl who wants to attend the girls' toilet, no, you can't do that, that's a detriment or a denial of a partial denial of a benefit. So it's that type of discrimination which was functionally the problem for principals. That sort of fell on deaf ears for people who were in favour of the legislation, and it ultimately came down to the votes of crossbenchers in the Senate. And the government agreed to take that out as long as the ALP, Senator Wong, was pushing this bill with the backing of the Greens. The government said, well, we'll do a compromise, we'll agree with your change, provided we put in this provision that religious schools are entitled to teach in accordance with their faith. That was what the amendment would have been. And the ALP said, no, we can't do that, we don't accept that, because that might allow all sorts of discrimination. So then it went, there was a massive campaign, and two senators in the middle, formerly Nick Xenophon, now the Centre Alliance, said, no, we need to have that guarantee of religious schools being able to teach in accordance with their faith, and was blocked. It then went to a committee hearing of the Senate, which I attended and spoke at in February this year, and it's the same thing. So you've got the Coalition, you've got the Greens, you've got Labor, and you have one representative from the Centre Alliance. His name's Rex Patrick. He's a senator from South Australia, and he's a former submariner and an engineer. And he's the linchpin vote. And that's because enough people in South Australia ticked the box on their form. All right? If they ticked other boxes, things would have worked out differently. And at the end of the day, he said, I still think that religious schools should have the right to teach students in accordance with their faith. And so I'm not going to approve this bill. And so it sort of sunk. But it remains Labor Party policy and Greens policy to change the Act and to remove those provisions and not put in a right to teach for religious schools to teach in accordance with their faith position. Okay? So I say that for two reasons. One is it's important as to how you vote in the Senate, because those crossbenchers become very important. And secondly, there are some significant issues out there for religious freedom and the ability of Christians and Christian organisations, and not just Christians, Muslim and Hindu and Sikh and so on, and Jewish, to be able to propagate their faith within their schools and colleges. By the way, that bill, the Wong bill, would have applied to all training institutions, so theological colleges, chaplaincy colleges, pastoral worker colleges and so on, not just schools. And it had been so broadly drafted that would have applied to any education activity in a religious body, such as sermons in a church, Sunday school, Quran classes in a mosque, etc. So that was also pointed out to the Labor Party, but they continued to go ahead. So, okay, just saying that's a significant issue. I think I've probably said enough about all of that, and now I throw it open to you guys to make any comments or ask any questions you'd like to.